Stepmom's plan to force CEO into marrying her daughter fails when he sees the real bride. I'm your storyteller, James, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. I hope you're doing well, staying safe, and holding on to the little joys in life. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And hey, what's the weather like in your hometown right now? Rainy, sunny, cloudy with a bit of hope? I love knowing where this story is reaching hearts. And if you're still not a part of James's family, then please hit that subscribe button and join us. This space is all about powerful emotions, healing journeys, and love stories that touch the soul. Let me say a short prayer for you before we begin. May your heart always find peace. May your nights be gentle, and may your days bring you closer to the light you deserve. You're not alone here. So take a deep breath, turn the volume up, and let's dive into the story, because this one, my friend, might just stay with you forever. After the sudden and heartbreaking death of her beloved father, Mega's world fell into a darkness that had no borders, no edges, no end. It swallowed her whole like a storm that refused to pass, and though her brown, smooth skin glowed with youthful beauty, her soul had begun to tremble under the weight of abandonment, grief, and silent suffering that no one else around her seemed to even notice, let alone soothe. Her father had been everything to her, a protector, a guide, a gentle voice in the chaos of the world, a man who called her "my star" when the world tried to dim her light, a man who brushed her hair with his hands and called her beautiful even on days when she cried from the inside out. His arms had been her safest place, and his voice had been the song that made her believe in hope, even when the world showed its cruelest sides. But now that voice was gone, that warmth had faded into the cold ashes of reality, and all that remained was a silent, frozen house that no longer felt like home. After the funeral, which had been filled with distant relatives who shed tears that dried too quickly, and neighbors who only came for courtesy's sake, Mega stood in her black dress, clutching the last photo of her father like it was the last drop of air in a drowning world. And when the crowd dispersed, her nightmare truly began. Virginia, her stepmother, had never been kind to her even when her father was alive, but she wore a mask back then, a painted smile, a fake sweetness, a calm poison. But now that mask had shattered like glass, and the sharp edges of her true nature cut deep into Mega's fragile heart with every word, every command, every insult thrown at her without mercy or remorse. Virginia wasted no time claiming the house and its wealth, declaring herself the sole authority in everything from meals to inheritance. And although Mega had been promised love and care, all she received was humiliation, wrapped in silence and pain. Day after day, she was forced to scrub the floors, polish the windows until her fingers bled, wake before dawn to prepare breakfast for Virginia and her daughter Liana, and retreat into corners when guests arrived so she wouldn't embarrass the family with her presence, as Virginia liked to say. Liana, who had always carried her mother's arrogance like a crown, now blossomed into an even crueler shadow, mocking Mega with venomous smiles, flaunting her new clothes, designer bags, and expensive perfume as if wealth had erased all decency from her soul. She called Mega names: orphan girl, maid sister, useless shadow, and laughed when Mega flinched. But Mega, with her wide, soulful eyes and lips that trembled but never lashed out, chose silence over retaliation, grace over bitterness, and dignity over breakdowns. In the privacy of her tiny room upstairs, more of a store space than a bedroom, Mega kept a small wooden box under her pillow, a box that held letters her father had written, a necklace he gave her on her 12th birthday, and tiny pressed flowers they had collected from the garden together, all memories that kept her from breaking completely. Sometimes at night, when the world outside was wrapped in quiet and the moon poured silver through the cracked window, Mega would step onto the old balcony her father built for her, the one they used to sit on with mugs of cocoa, pointing at constellations and talking about dreams. And there she would whisper her sorrow to the stars, asking them if they could still hear him, if they could tell him she missed him more than breath itself, if they could send her strength when the days felt unbearable. Every morning she woke up before the sun, her bones aching but her soul refusing to dim, and though her clothes were worn and her hands chapped, there was a quiet fire in her heart that kept her alive, kept her going, kept her believing in something she couldn't yet see but deeply felt. She helped around the house more than anyone, yet was treated worse than a stranger. She was denied fresh food while Liana feasted, denied new clothes while Liana filled closets, denied peace while others slept soundly. But even in that hollow silence, Mega refused to become bitter. Her kindness was not a weakness. It was a quiet rebellion, a shield she wore proudly in a world that tried to steal her softness. Virginia didn't allow her to study further, claiming it was a waste of money and that girls like you should focus on being useful, not smart. So Mega began reading old books her father had left behind, hiding them under her bed and reading them by candlelight whenever she could. Each page was a reminder that there was more to life than what she was enduring now, that somewhere out there existed a world where love wasn't cruel, where people didn't treat others like tools, where hearts could heal. Though she never said a word back when Liana paraded in front of her with gifts and dates and parties, Mega sometimes looked into the mirror and tried to see what her father always saw, a beautiful, dignified girl with eyes full of depth and lips full of unspoken stories. Her hair, long and black and naturally wavy, framed her graceful face like a crown nature had gifted her, and even though she often tied it in a simple braid, it swayed like silk when the wind touched it. She carried herself with quiet poise, unaware of how stunning she truly was, unaware of how many people would fall to their knees if they saw what her soul looked like, not just her face. Her days blended into each other. Wake up, work, obey, be invisible. And yet, inside her, something was growing. A dream, a flicker of rebellion, a longing for more. But she kept it hidden, afraid that if it surfaced too soon, Virginia would crush it before it ever had a chance to bloom. One evening, as she swept the porch while Liana laughed in the living room watching some romantic movie, Mega paused for a second, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Papa, please send me something. Someone. Some way out." Her voice soft as wind, her prayer barely audible, but the sincerity behind it shook the air. She didn't know that somewhere fate had already started listening, that her quiet endurance had caught the attention of destiny itself. And though nothing changed that night, the stars twinkled brighter than usual, and a breeze danced through her hair as if something ancient had whispered back. Mega didn't notice that her tears had stopped for the first time in weeks, or that her heart felt a little less heavy, or that the night didn't seem so cruel anymore. For now her world remained confined to duty, pain, and whispers under the stars. But deep within her spirit a seed of change had been planted, and while Virginia walked around the house like a queen drunk on power, she had no idea that the girl she treated like dirt would one day rise not just as a survivor, but as the chosen one in a story far greater than any crown or mansion could ever promise. And so, Mega continued, carrying her pain like poetry, her hope like a candle, and her memories like armor, not knowing that the love she once prayed for was already on its way toward her, hidden behind events yet to unfold, but destined to arrive with the force of a storm and the warmth of a sunrise that would change everything. The breeze that had gently kissed Mega's face the night before still lingered in the morning air as she swept the front porch in silence, her thoughts drifting between distant dreams and unspoken wishes. When Virginia's sharp heels clacked across the tiled floor with an authority that warned of incoming cruelty, The woman's shrill voice cut through the calm like shattered glass as she waved a silver-trimmed envelope in the air and barked out to Liana with glee that made Mega's stomach twist before she even knew why. "It's from Mr. Rayman," Virginia declared, tossing the envelope onto the marble coffee table as if it were a trophy she had won, her lips curling into a smirk. "He's throwing a grand party this Saturday at the Orchid Estate. Can you believe it? And it says, 'Families welcome.' I knew staying in touch with his secretary would come in handy." Liana squealed with shallow excitement, clapping her manicured hands and twirling as if she were already the center of attention, already imagining the way she'd pose for photos or charm men in suits she could never truly impress. Mega stayed by the door, broom in hand, her presence acknowledged only with a glare and a snap of Virginia's fingers. "You'll come too, Mega," she said with a sneer, not out of generosity but necessity. "Someone has to help carry our bags and keep Liana's lipstick intact. God knows she can't do that herself." Liana giggled, tossing her hair over her shoulder, and added mockingly, "Just wear something that doesn't make you look completely homeless. I don't want people thinking we brought our maid." Mega bowed her head in silence, used to this treatment, her mind already accepting that she would be the one in the shadows again, unnoticed, unheard, a ghost at someone else's celebration. She spent the following days scrubbing Liana's heels, ironing Virginia's designer gown, and polishing jewelry she wasn't allowed to touch, all while reusing an old faded dress of her own, one of the last ones her father had saved for her, plain but dignified. When the night of the party arrived, the house erupted in chaos. Virginia shouting about timing, Liana panicking over a chipped nail, and Mega, unnoticed, tied her straight black hair into a low knot, brushed the creases from her simple blue dress, and stepped into flat shoes that had seen too many years. Her smooth brown skin, radiant in its natural glow, didn't need embellishment. Her wide eyes carried depth that makeup could never replicate, and though her reflection was quiet and unadorned, there was a stunning truth about her beauty that even she could not recognize. The drive to the Orchid Estate was long and filled with Liana's chatter about which elites might attend, whom she might accidentally fall into conversation with, and how she would fake a British accent if needed. Mega, sandwiched between perfume clouds and judgmental silence, gazed out the window at the full moon that seemed to follow her like a quiet companion. When they arrived, the mansion stood like a palace carved from dreams, arched windows, glowing chandeliers, and laughter spilling from grand halls. And as they walked through the golden gates, Virginia held Liana's arm as if she were escorting royalty, while Maga followed a few steps behind, carrying a clutch she didn't own and hopes she dared not hold. Inside, the hall buzzed with music, fine wine, expensive gowns, and sharp suits. Glittering smiles masked sharp ambitions, and every face wore a practiced expression. Mega kept close to the wall, her eyes scanning the dazzling decor, unfamiliar with such grandeur, yet holding herself with quiet grace. No one noticed her, until someone did. A hush swept through a portion of the crowd as Nikon entered. He didn't need to announce himself, his presence did it for him. Tall, with sculpted features, neatly styled hair, a well-groomed beard that framed his chiseled jaw, and eyes sharp as cut crystal, Nikon walked like a man who owned time itself. The powerful CEO, billionaire, and silent storm of the business world wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his very breath laced with confidence and mystery. Women turned their heads, men straightened their ties, and hosts rushed forward with eager greetings. But Nikon didn't care for greetings. He offered a polite nod, uttered brief courtesies, and kept walking, his eyes scanning the room not for business allies or social opportunities, but for something even he didn't yet understand. Then it happened. His gaze collided with hers. Mega, who had just turned slightly to adjust her hair, caught the full intensity of his stare, and in that instant, something within the air shifted, something soft, electric, and impossible to name. She froze, her breath caught without permission. Nikon didn't blink. For a moment, the noise of the party dulled, blurred into the background like waves retreating from the shore, and time seemed to lose its rhythm. She wasn't dressed to impress. She wasn't even standing like she knew she mattered. Yet to Nikon, she was the only clarity in a room full of pretenders. Mega looked away quickly, unsure if she'd imagined it, but when she glanced back, he was still watching, curious, silent, drawn in a way that defied logic. He excused himself gently from a conversation and began walking toward her, each step purposeful, each moment feeling longer than the last. Mega's heartbeat fluttered like pages in the wind, unsure whether to stay or flee. But her feet remained rooted to the marble floor, her soul whispering that something extraordinary was beginning, even if she didn't yet know what. Virginia, who had been gloating to some old acquaintances nearby, noticed his movement and followed his eyes. And when she saw they were locked on Mega, her smile stiffened, eyes narrowing with confusion and immediate disapproval. She grabbed Liana's hand, whispered harshly, "Fix your hair, he's coming this way," and shoved her forward. But Nikon didn't even glance at Liana. He stopped a foot away from Mega and, in a voice calm but deeply resonant, said, "You're not like anyone I've ever met at these parties." Mega blinked, unsure if he was speaking to her or to some idea he had just realized, and managed a gentle, "Sir?" He smiled, an actual smile, not the social kind, but something rare, genuine, and extended his hand. "I'm Nikon." She hesitated, unsure if it was right to accept it, but something inside her, a courage she didn't know she still had, guided her fingers to his. Her hand touched his palm, and her world changed shape. "Mega," she whispered. The moment hung in the air, sacred and tender. In the background, Virginia's expression soured while Liana fumed, but Nikon was already lost in the quiet spell cast between them, and nothing else in the room mattered. For the first time in a long while, Mega felt seen, not observed, not used, but truly seen. And though she didn't know where this moment would lead, she knew it was no accident. Destiny had just walked through the door in a tailored suit, and everything around her, even the pain she had been carrying for years, had just begun to shift. As the dim golden lights of the Orchid Estate chandelier danced across the glint of Nikon's watch, the last word that Mega had whispered, her name, barely audible and yet unforgettable, echoed in his mind like a chord struck inside an old, forgotten cathedral. Her hand still rested lightly in his, not in confidence, not in comfort, but in wonder, as if neither of them quite understood what had just bloomed in that fraction of a moment. She slowly withdrew it, lowering her gaze, her long lashes casting soft shadows on the gentle curves of her smooth brown cheeks. The elegance of her silence pulled at something in Nikon's chest, a weight he had long buried beneath power, routine, and expectation. For the first time in years, he noticed the beat of his own heart, the fragile vulnerability in the quiet between words. He tried to speak again, not with practiced charm or calculated poise, but with the sincerity of someone who had stumbled across something unexpectedly beautiful. "You look different," he said, hesitating as if afraid the word might offend her, then quickly added, "Not like these people. Not plastic. You feel real." Mega raised her eyes just slightly, unsure whether to smile or run, but her lips curved barely, like the first crescent of a new moon. Nikon noticed it like a sacred gesture, as if she had handed him something precious without even realizing it. He gestured toward a small table near the balcony and asked, "May I?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, following him. each step unsure, as if walking beside someone so powerful might suddenly shatter the illusion that he'd noticed her. They sat not facing each other fully, but angled, enough to see without overwhelming, his frame tall and imposing, yet softened in the presence of her gentle aura, and her presence so unassuming, it made him feel like a man relearning what it meant to notice. He asked simple questions, where she grew up, what she liked to do, and though her words came few and slow, there was a depth in every response that pulled him in further. She spoke of gardens her father once planted, stories they shared beneath the stars, the joy of drawing little patterns on windows fogged by breath during winter mornings. Each word she offered carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was real. And Nikon, surrounded all his life by luxury, pretension, and rehearsed affection, felt those words pierce him in the quietest, most unexpected way. Mega, meanwhile, sat still, fingers folded in her lap, trying to steady the tremble that had started in her chest the moment he looked into her eyes. No man had ever spoken to her like this, not with reverence, not with genuine interest, not like he was willing to slow down his entire world just to hear her speak. She was terrified of saying too much, of ruining whatever spell had been cast between them. Every second beside him felt like standing barefoot at the edge of a tide. She couldn't predict, waves of emotion pulling at her resolve. Her heart was not used to hope. Her silence was her armor. But Nikon didn't see silence as distance. He saw it as depth, and the more she chose her words carefully, the more he wanted to know what else lived within her. From a distance, Virginia watched them with eyes sharp as broken glass, her painted lips pressed together in furious restraint. She tugged Liana's wrist, nodding toward the table where Mega sat with Nikon, her smile now trembling on the verge of venom. "What is she doing?" she hissed under her breath. "She's ruining everything." Liana, arms crossed and pride wounded, scoffed. "She's probably pretending to be shy. She always pulls this helpless act around men." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. It wasn't an act, and that terrified her more than anything. Nikon stood now slowly, not wanting to frighten Mega with the abruptness of movement. He looked around, sensing the sharp gazes now following him, but they no longer mattered. The crowd that once adored his arrival now dissolved into background static. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit and carefully pulled out a simple black business card. No logo, no title, just a name and a number in silver script. He stepped closer to Mega, the card resting between his fingers like a secret message. Bending slightly, voice low so that no one else would hear, he whispered, "Call me sometime." Her breath caught again, lips parting slightly in disbelief. He didn't say it with urgency or as a command, but as a gift, as if to say only if you want to. Slowly, almost reverently, she reached for the card, her fingers brushing his again, and tucked it carefully into the inner seam of her dress, away from prying eyes, away from the world. That small slip of paper felt heavier than gold in her palm, not because of who he was, but because of what it meant. Someone saw her, truly saw her. The music swelled in the background as more guests began to prepare to leave. Nikon didn't press further. He simply looked at her one more time, long and steady, as if memorizing the calm poetry in her posture, and then turned with deliberate grace, walking back through the hall with an air that was quiet and unreadable. Virginia smiled tightly as he passed, bowing her head in false politeness. "Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Nikon. I do hope you enjoyed the company," she said sweetly, placing a hand on Liana's shoulder to remind him of who she wanted in his path. Nikon paused only briefly and said with a non-committal nod, "Yes." It was surprisingly meaningful. Then, without another glance, he stepped out into the night. Mega stood there for a few seconds longer, still near the table, her hand resting unconsciously over the hidden card, her eyes tracing the door he had disappeared through, wondering if she would ever feel this way again. As the party ended and guests left with champagne memories and hollow gossip, Mega walked silently behind Virginia and Liana to the car. No one asked her anything. No one noticed the flush in her cheeks or the new quiet light in her eyes. But inside her, something had awakened. Something small but undeniable had bloomed. A courage she didn't know she had. A desire to know more, to believe more. As the car sped through the night back toward the cold house she no longer belonged to, Mega pressed her hand to the fabric over her heart, where Nikon's card now lived, and whispered to the stars above like she used to with her father. Only this time she didn't whisper about pain or loneliness. This time she whispered a name, not in hope, but in awe. That night, after returning home from the party that subtly changed the axis of her life, Mega sat quietly in the corner of her dimly lit room, her back resting against the creaky wooden frame of her narrow bed, her fingers gently brushing the hidden slit in her dress where Nikon's business card still rested like a sacred secret. The house was quiet except for the distant clatter of plates in the kitchen, where Virginia barked orders at the tired old housemaid and Liana's footsteps stomped up the staircase, still grumbling about the party and the so-called attention Mega had dared to receive. But none of that reached Mega's ears anymore. Her world had shifted, softly, invisibly, but entirely. She waited, heart beating fast, for the whole house to fall silent, for the final door to close, for the cruel voices to fade behind the hush of sleeping rooms. Then, in the privacy of shadows and moonlight, she locked her door carefully, pushing a worn chair beneath the handle for good measure, a ritual she never missed anymore. She pulled out the card like a fragile letter from a forbidden lover, its silver text glinting softly under the moon's glow slipping through her window. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming stir of feelings she had never known until now. With a breath she didn't realize she was holding, she took out the small old phone Virginia let her keep only for emergencies, and which Virginia believed was nothing more than a useless piece of outdated plastic. She had forgotten it in her haste to rush Mega home that night, a mistake she didn't yet know would unravel her entire plan. Mega's fingers moved carefully across the keypad, her pulse louder than the wind outside. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the send button. Then, finally, she texted one simple word. Hi. It was almost too small a word for all that she felt, but it was all she had courage for. She placed the phone beside her, heart pounding. Seconds passed, then a minute, then two. She held her breath as the screen blinked softly, and then it lit up again. Nikon, I hoped you would. Her hand flew to her mouth to keep in the gasp that threatened to escape. He was waiting. For her. And suddenly all the harshness of her stepmother's scorn, all the bitter chores and biting insults, all the days of being ignored and unseen, melted into that one glowing reply. From that night on, their hidden conversations began, sometimes in words, sometimes in silence that spoke louder than words could. At first, they exchanged short messages. He asked how her day was. She hesitated but answered honestly, even about the pain. He didn't pity her. He listened. When she confessed how the stars comforted her on nights when her heart felt too full of sadness, he replied that he was outside too, looking up at the same sky, thinking of her. That image alone, him somewhere across the city, his powerful hands resting on a balcony railing, his eyes searching the constellations for her presence, sent warmth through her veins. Days turned into nights, and nights into a new kind of dawn within her soul. They began calling, quiet and cautious, his voice deep and soft in her ear, like velvet against her skin. He spoke of his lonely world, of boardrooms full of liars and glasses clinking in celebration of nothing real, of being praised by people who never saw the man behind the empire. With Mega, he shed that armor. "You make the noise disappear," he said one night. "You're like silence, but the kind that heals." And Mega, curled under her thin blanket, her hand pressed to her chest, whispered, "You see me." Every night when the world outside their rooms faded, their voices painted a new one, a world where Mega didn't feel like a servant trapped in someone else's home, and where Nikon wasn't a king imprisoned by his own kingdom. They laughed about small things, her accidentally burning tea, his failed attempt at cooking eggs. He sent her pictures of sunsets from his rooftop. She sent him scribbles of stars she drew with a broken pencil on notebook paper. She told him about her father's stories, about how he used to trace constellations and say every person has a star watching over them. "You're mine," Nikon whispered once. "You're the star I didn't know I was missing." She held the phone to her ear that night, long after the call ended, not wanting to lose the warmth in his voice. Each morning after their calls, she hid the phone under her mattress, careful not to let the charger cord show. She walked through her day with a secret glow, a lightness in her steps that even Liana's jabs couldn't smother. Virginia noticed a change but attributed it to fantasy and assumed Mega was just growing delusional with age, never suspecting that a bond was flourishing right beneath her roof. Virginia still believed her plan was in motion, still pushed Liana to smile wider and wear shorter dresses, still praised Liana's forced charm, and dismissed Mega like a shadow. But love was writing its script behind locked doors and softly, glowing screens. One night, Mega shared a poem she'd written, hesitant and shy. "It's silly," she said, "maybe even childish." But Nikon read it twice over and replied, "It's the most honest thing I've heard in years." He read lines back to her in his low, careful voice, each word sacred on his tongue. That night she cried, not out of sadness, but because, for once, someone heard her without her needing to scream. The moon grew to fullness in the sky over the weeks, watching over them as the bond deepened like a quiet fire that refused to fade. Nikon told her about a moment in the party she didn't even remember, how he'd watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and thought it was the most graceful gesture he'd ever seen. Mega laughed, embarrassed, and he told her not to laugh at her beauty. "You think you're small, Mega," he said gently, "but you are vast, in heart, in soul, in everything." That night, as she lay on her bed with the phone cradled to her ear and her eyes lost in the ceiling's shadows, she whispered, "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. Then his voice came, slow and certain. "Because the world stopped when I saw you, because I see home in your silence." She didn't know how to reply, but she didn't have to. Their silence, again, spoke more than words. That was the rhythm of them, slow, sacred, secret. Every conversation was a thread, weaving something unseen but unbreakable between their lives. And though the days outside were still cruel, though Virginia's voice still cracked through the halls like a whip, though Liana still paraded like royalty, Mega no longer walked alone. Each night gave her back what the day tried to steal, and in every star above she saw the promise of his voice waiting in the dark. Nikon became her escape, her anchor, her moonlight in a house of shadows, and she, quiet, kind, trembling Mega, became his peace, his pause from the madness, his reason to hope again. Neither of them said the word love yet, but it was there, swelling beneath every late-night whisper and every heartbeat between calls. They didn't need to say it. They were living it. That evening, as Mega gently tucked her old phone beneath her pillow after another quiet night of whispered laughter with Nikon, she had no idea that the next day would try to silence her joy in the cruelest way. Morning dawned with a strange tension humming through the walls. Virginia had been unusually active since sunrise, barking orders, rearranging furniture, polishing the family's tarnished silver cutlery and yelling at Liana to stop wasting time on her phone and go practice walking in heels. Mega, still unaware of what storm was quietly building, swept the front steps in her usual routine, the broom bristling across cracked concrete as autumn leaves danced around her feet. But something felt wrong. She sensed it in the stiffness of the air, in the way Virginia's voice trembled not from stress, but anticipation. That night, Virginia had planned her greatest deception, a dinner that was more a performance, a trap baited with luxury and desperation. And the prey was Nikon. She had extended a carefully worded invitation the week before, laced with flattery and subtle hints of exclusivity. Only the most esteemed guest, she'd written, just an intimate family dinner in your honor. When he agreed, her eyes lit with greed. Liana was dolled up from head to toe in the finest dress their money could rent, her hair styled in curls, her makeup done by a local artist who owed Virginia a favor. She looked beautiful, yes, but in a loud, practiced way, her smile rehearsed, her words memorized like a desperate actress before an audition. Virginia stood back and admired her handiwork, then turned her eyes toward the one problem that remained, Mega. For all her planning, she couldn't risk Mega appearing tonight. Her presence had become dangerous. Nikon's eyes at the party had proven that. "I'll deal with you," she muttered coldly under her breath, eyes narrowing as she watched Mega quietly placing plates on the table. That afternoon, she called her into the back hallway, her tone sugary and fake. "We have guests tonight, and I don't want you ruining anything. Go to the storage room and find the silver tea set, the one your father brought from Jaipur." Mega, unaware of the trap, obeyed. She stepped into the dusty storage room, a cramped, dim place lined with rusting shelves, old trunks, and cobwebbed boxes, and crouched down to search the lower cabinets. Just then, the door slammed shut behind her. She jumped up, rushing to it, but the metallic click of the lock confirmed her fear. "Virginia," she called, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of heels walking away. "Let me out, please. Why are you doing this?" Still no reply. Mega banged on the door, her palms aching, her voice trembling. She paced the narrow room in panic, heart hammering. Her breath caught in her throat. The air was thick with dust and betrayal. And then, as if heaven hadn't abandoned her entirely, her fingers brushed against her pillow pocket, the small slit in her dress she always sewed herself, and her heart stilled. Her phone. Virginia, in her frantic scheming, had forgotten to take it. That careless oversight became the only thread of hope in Mega's trembling hands. She sank to the floor, back pressed against a wooden box, and shakily typed, "Nikon. Something's wrong." Meanwhile, Nikon arrived at the house in a sleek black car, his presence radiating quiet power. He wore a navy blue suit, clean cut, the white shirt beneath his blazer crisp against his fair skin. His eyes were calm but searching. Liana and Virginia greeted him at the door like butterflies swarming a flame, both dressed as if for a red carpet. "Welcome, Mr. Nikon," Virginia cooed, her voice soaked. In fake sweetness, "Dinner is nearly ready. We're so honored." Nikon stepped in, nodding politely, but his eyes scanned the hallway behind them. "Where's Mega?" he asked casually. The question hit Virginia like a slap. Her smile faltered, then quickly reformed. "Oh," she said with a false brightness. "She left earlier today. Her uncle's ill. She went to tend to him. Such a dutiful girl." Liana tried to steer the conversation away with compliments and practiced charm, but Nikon's face turned unreadable. He sat down for dinner, his gestures polite, his words smooth, but his heart had dropped. He knew something was wrong. Mega would never leave without telling him. He excused himself under the pretense of needing to take a business call and stepped onto the porch. His phone buzzed. A single message from Mega. "She locked me in." Storage room, please. His jaw clenched. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He turned and walked back in, past the smiling faces, past the dining table set like a throne, past the gold-plated lies. "I'd like to use the restroom," he said. Virginia nodded, waving toward the hallway. Nikon didn't go to the restroom. He went straight to the back of the house, down the servants' corridor he remembered from the house layout, toward the forgotten room where he knew she would be. The moment he reached it, he pressed his ear to the door. "Mega," he whispered. A gasp. "Nikon." The lock clicked. The door creaked open. And there she was, sitting on the floor, dress wrinkled, eyes wide with unshed tears, hands pressed to her chest as if she didn't believe he was real. He stepped in without a word, knelt and gathered her into his arms. "I'm here," he whispered, holding her close, letting her sob into his jacket. "You're safe now." She clung to him like a lifeline, the world spinning too fast, but his embrace stilled it. After a moment, he leaned back and wiped her cheek gently with his thumb. "We're going to make this right, but I need you to trust me, okay?" She nodded, her voice lost, but her eyes full of belief. "Stay quiet for now. Let them think they've won." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm going to give them what they want, and then I'm going to destroy their plan piece by piece." He helped her up, guiding her carefully into a hidden back hallway where she could stay until it was time. Then he straightened his suit, adjusted his cuffs, and walked back into the dining room with the same calm grace as before. "You were gone a while," Virginia chirped. "Hope you found everything all right." Nikon smiled. "Yes, everything is exactly where it should be." He sat back down beside Liana, who batted her eyelashes. "This dinner is lovely," he said. "You've both gone to great lengths. It means a lot." Virginia beamed, believing her trap was finally working. "We only want what's best for you. You deserve a wife worthy of your name." "I agree," he said softly, lifting his glass. "And I've made my decision." He raised his glass and both women leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I will marry your daughter." The words were like fireworks in Virginia's heart. Her mouth opened in shock and victory, and Liana's eyes widened in delight. "Really?" she gasped. "Truly?" Nikon nodded, his eyes glinting not with love, but quiet fire. "Truly." A wedding was arranged, but none of them, none except Mega and Nikon, knew what was truly coming. Nikon sat at the dinner table, sipping slowly from a glass of water as the dining room glowed with candlelight and false joy, the silver cutlery reflecting the artificial smiles across from him. Liana kept shifting in her seat, adjusting the sequins on her overly glittered dress while trying to impress him with stories about her so-called dreams and her imaginary interest in global business. Virginia laughed at all the wrong times, trying to carry the evening with her fake charm, her eyes constantly flicking to Nikon's face for approval, for signs that he was falling into their trap. But Nikon had mastered the art of hiding fire behind stillness. He nodded when appropriate, smiled when necessary, yet his mind was nowhere in that room. His heart was back in the dusty storage closet where Mega had been locked, and every tick of the ornate grandfather clock in the corner felt like a knife dragging across his chest. He needed to see her again, not just know she was safe, but hold her, breathe her in, assure her face to face that he would never let anything like this happen to her again. So, at the first chance he got, he gently placed his napkin on the table and stood. "Excuse me," he said with polite calm. "I need to take a call. Business never rests, unfortunately." Virginia gave a tight-lipped smile. Of course, of course. Take your time, dear." He stepped away, his movements unhurried to avoid suspicion, but his pulse was pounding. As soon as he was out of sight, he pulled out the second phone from his inside coat pocket, the one with the secret number only Mega knew. His fingers moved swiftly over the screen. He found her contact. My piece. He tapped call. The phone rang twice, 3 times, then a soft click. Hello? Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and trembling. His breath hitched at the sound. Mega, are you okay? He asked softly, stepping into the shadows of the hallway, voice laced with urgency, but trying to stay gentle. I'm locked in a room, she whispered, her voice breaking. She locked me in, but she forgot to take my phone. I've been waiting. I didn't know if you would. Shh, he interrupted, his voice suddenly like silk wrapped in steel. I'm here. I'll always answer when you call. She sniffled on the other end, and he could almost feel her shivering. Tell me where you are. What do you see? Describe everything. She paused, voice shaky but determined to help him find her. It's the hallway past the old laundry room. There's a wooden door with a small iron handle. There's a crack on the bottom of the door, and the floor smells like dust and old paint. He already knew. He remembered the old blueprints from when he studied the house layout weeks ago in curiosity. That was the storage room near the attic stairs. He turned and moved fast now, slipping through the quiet corridors like a phantom, his shoes silent against the cold wooden floors. He climbed the staircase, skipping creaky steps with practiced stealth. His fingers curled into fists, rage tightening in his chest. He reached the door. Just as she said, faded wood, rusted hinges, a thin sliver of light at the bottom. Mega, he whispered, pressing his palm to the door. I'm here. Nikon, she choked out, her voice rising. He stepped back, grabbed the handle, and with one sharp push, the fragile latch broke free. The door creaked open. The dim light from the hallway spilled in. And there she was, curled up against the far wall, dress crumpled, hair slightly undone, phone still gripped tightly in her hand, her wide eyes reflecting both shock and unspeakable relief. She stared for 1 second, as if not trusting her vision, then stumbled forward. You really came, she breathed. I didn't know if... But before she could finish, she was in his arms. He caught her against his chest, strong hands cradling her head, holding her as if she was made of glass. I told you, he murmured, his lips close to her ear. No door, no lie, no one could keep me from you. She began to cry then, not from fear or pain, but from overwhelming release. He let her sob against him, his fingers gently stroking her hair, murmuring her name like a prayer. Mega, Mega. They tried to hide you from me, but I see only you. Only you. Her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, clutching him as if he was her anchor in a world that had tried again and again to drown her. His suit absorbed her tears, but he didn't care. He would have let her soak him entirely if it meant she felt safe. After a long moment, he leaned back, his eyes roaming over her face with fierce tenderness. Did she hurt you? She shook her head quickly, then paused. Not physically, but it hurts. Being treated like I don't matter, like I'm invisible. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching. You're not invisible to me. You never were. From the first second I saw you, you silenced every room I've ever walked through. They may have tried to lock you away like some shameful secret, but you shine too brightly to be hidden. Her lower lip quivered. I didn't want you to see me like this. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing the streaks of tears on her smooth brown skin. This is how I want to see you, honest, brave, unbreakable. His eyes burned with quiet fury. They think they're in control. They believe they've won. But tonight was their last lie. I promise you that. He helped her to her feet, steadying her. There's a guest room on the other side of the house. You'll stay there. Lock the door from inside. I'll say goodnight, then come to you once they sleep. She blinked. But the wedding. They think... He touched a finger to her lips. Let them think what they want. Let them believe I've chosen their daughter. Let them prepare for a victory that will never come. I'm not marrying greed. I'm not marrying deceit. I'm marrying the truth, and that truth is you." She nodded slowly, every part of her trembling, not from fear, but from the tenderness he wrapped her in like a second skin. He kissed her forehead, slow and warm. "Go. Rest. The storm's almost over." Then, with one last look, he turned and vanished into the shadows again, stepping back into the farce of laughter and lies, his mind set on the moment he would finally unveil the truth. The moon had long since climbed to its throne when Nikon quietly left the guest room hallway, leaving behind Mega's trembling form, curled in silent hope, her trust now stitched into every beat of his heart. He returned to the false world downstairs, to the room thick with deception and forced hospitality, where Liana giggled with artificial grace and Virginia poured drinks with trembling eagerness, convinced her plan was blooming perfectly. Nikon played along, his mask fitted so tightly even his pulse did not betray him. But inside, a decision had already begun to crystallize, a plan that required patience, precision, and a perfect act. At dawn, before even the sun dared stretch across the sky, he rose, dressed in a crisp gray suit, his face unreadable, and drove straight back to the same house where deceit had dared to hide love. The servants had not even begun their morning rounds when he arrived, but Virginia was already up, the scent of fresh manipulation trailing her like perfume. She met him in the drawing room, her silk robe carelessly knotted, eyes widening at the sight of him. "Mr. Nikon," she said, barely able to conceal her hunger for victory. "You're here so early. Did you not sleep well?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the room, his polished shoes tapping rhythmically against the marble floor, and turned to face her with the stillness of a man who'd made an irreversible choice. "I've made my decision," he said firmly, his voice a clean blade cutting through the morning haze. Virginia held her breath. "I want to marry Liana." There was a pause, one heartbeat, then two, and then an eruption. Virginia gasped, her hands flying to her chest, a fake gasp of shock smothering the triumphant scream in her throat. "Oh, oh dear heavens," she cried, tears already forming. This is beyond my wildest—" She turned quickly and called out, "Liana! Liana, come here!" The girl came skipping, practically floating down the stairs in her velvet slippers. Her eyes, usually dulled with entitlement, lit up with the shimmer of shallow victory. "He said yes," her mother cried, throwing her arms around her. "He's going to marry you," Liana squealed, her hands already fluttering with imagined lace and diamonds. Nikon watched them with a calm so chilling it almost cracked the air around him. But his lips wore the curve of a lie so convincing, even silence couldn't challenge it. He shook Virginia's hand politely, endured Liana's hug like a statue carved from granite, and nodded when she babbled about wedding colors and how her name would sound with his. But his mind was already counting hours, calculating every move until the final moment. Later that night, when the house had settled back into its delusions, Nikon returned quietly, not through the front, but through a small side gate that only the gardener used. He slipped through the darkness like a secret itself and tapped gently on the door of the same guest room where he had once wiped tears from Mega's cheeks. She opened it, still dressed in the same simple nightwear, her hair down, face bare, but eyes glowing with silent questions. He stepped inside, closed the door gently, and took her hand. "You heard?" he asked softly. She nodded, the word yes barely making it past her dry lips. "They're planning the wedding," she whispered, unable to hide the ache. "I heard them laughing. Liana said you're hers now." She looked up into his eyes, her soul aching for clarity. "Is it true?" "No," he said quickly, cupping her face with both hands. Not even for a second. You are my beginning and my end, Mega. You always were. A tear escaped her eye, and he caught it with his thumb. Then why? She asked. Why lie? His lips pressed together in thought before he whispered, because this lie is the only way I can shatter all of theirs. He sat with her on the edge of the bed, their fingers interlocked tightly like a vow. If I refuse now, they'll spin another trap. That matters, he said, brushing his lips against her knuckles. Now listen closely. I'll send you a message the night before the wedding. You'll be given a dress, one only you will wear. The moment I call your name, walk forward with your head held high. No one will ever silence you again. She nodded, trying to seal his words into her soul. Then he held her one more time, quietly, not with lust, but with the depth of a man who was preparing for battle, not for himself, but for the woman he loved. Minutes later, he vanished into the night again, blending with the shadows as the house around them danced blindly toward a wedding that was never meant to be. Upstairs, Leanna dreamed of crowns she never earned, and Virginia slept with a smile carved by deceit. But somewhere in the silence, Mega placed her palm over her heart, where a plan and a promise had been planted, and waited. Mega spent the entire night sitting by her window, her trembling fingers pressed against the folded message Nikon had sent, a simple note that carried the weight of a lifetime. Be ready. Tomorrow the world will see what I see in you. She hadn't slept, not because of anxiety, but because every heartbeat was an echo of the promise she now believed in, every second a step closer to her rebirth. Outside, the city began to stir. Birds stretched their wings, and dawn spilled pink light across the sky as if nature itself was blessing what was to come. In another part of town, a mansion was lit in gold and glitter. Virginia was already shouting orders at decorators, chefs, and stylists. She paced the halls like a queen preparing a coronation, her voice sharp, her expectations grand. Liana twirled before the mirror in a white dress stitched with pearls and diamonds, mistaking it for royalty, thinking it made her a bride worth remembering. The air was electric with anticipation. Photographers adjusted their lenses, violinists rehearsed their entrance pieces, and guests began to arrive, each step bringing with them a flurry of whispers and polished shoes. Everyone had heard that the great Nikon, one of the country's most powerful and handsome billionaires, was marrying today, and speculation filled the air like perfume. Who was the lucky girl? Inside, Nikon stood in a private chamber, not with nerves, but with the quiet steel of a man who was about to rewrite fate. His suit was tailored in midnight black, sharp and elegant, his eyes unreadable but intense, burning with the truth he was about to unveil. He stepped into the ceremony hall just as the golden aisle was bathed in warm light and a soft classical melody began to play. At the far end, Liana emerged, holding a bouquet as fake as the smile plastered across her painted face. Gasps echoed across the room as she walked with an air of victory, her mother shedding crocodile tears beside the altar, believing her daughter had achieved the ultimate conquest. Flashbulbs flickered like fireflies, catching every detail of the so-called bride's entrance. Nikon stood still, watching, not her, but the door behind her. His expression didn't change, though his pulse quickened. Virginia stepped forward and whispered proudly, "She's yours now." But he didn't respond. Instead, when Liana took her place beside him and the hall fell silent in expectation, Nikon did something no one predicted. He reached for the microphone from the officiant and turned to the sea of faces watching with hunger. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but thunderous in the hushed space, "there's a truth I must share." A hush swept through the hall. Virginia's smile faltered. Liana blinked, unsure if it was part of the script. Nikon continued, "Today I was expected to marry a woman, but I cannot go forward without honesty. I am not here to marry a puppet of pride or a product of manipulation. The murmurs grew louder, heads turning, eyes darting. Liana's hands tightened around her bouquet. Virginia took a sharp step forward. Mr. Nikon, what are you— He raised one hand, silencing her with the ease of a king. I came here today to marry the woman who owns my heart, he said, his eyes now scanning the crowd. The one who was never given a chance to be seen. The one who was locked away, hidden in darkness, yet still shone brighter than any jewel you could wrap in silk. His voice broke slightly, only to grow firmer. The one who endured cruelty with grace. The one who reminded me of what love means. A stunned silence swallowed the hall. Then he turned, slowly, purposefully, toward the grand wooden doors at the back of the aisle. Come in, Mega, he said softly, and the room held its breath. The double doors creaked open, and there she stood, Mega, draped in a breathtaking bridal gown that shimmered like moonlight captured in silk. Her brown, smooth skin glowed like bronze kissed by heaven itself. Her wide, soulful eyes searched for him. Her lips quivered, touched with a soft coral pink. The hall gasped in collective awe. Guests stood. Cameras forgot to flash. Even the musicians faltered. Her long, black, straight hair flowed down her back like a silken river, and a delicate veil floated behind her, like a dream set free. She didn't walk, she glided, grace blooming with every step, her head held high, her tears held in check only by the strength Nikon had planted in her spirit. She walked not toward a groom, but toward freedom, dignity, and a love she never asked for but deeply deserved. Virginia clutched her chest and staggered, her face losing all color. No, this can't be happening, she gasped. Nikon, you promised. Liana threw her bouquet to the floor, rage turning her face red. You lied to me. Nikon looked at them, unshaken. No, he said simply. You lied to yourselves. I told you what you wanted to hear, because you tried to trap me, while imprisoning the woman I love. Then he turned back to Mega and reached for her hand. This is my bride. The officiant, stunned but quick to recover, adjusted the mic. Then, shall we begin? We shall, Nikon said, never taking his eyes off Mega. He gently lifted her veil, and the two stood before the crowd like poetry in motion, fire and peace made flesh. As they exchanged vows, Mega's voice trembled with emotion, her words a quiet song of endurance, survival, and awakening. Nikon promised to never let her light be caged again. Rings were exchanged. Applause erupted. Cameras finally remembered their job. But Virginia collapsed to her knees, sobbing not from grief but from the crushing realization that power built on cruelty always crumbles. Liana fled, unable to watch love bloom where her deceit had died. But none of that mattered to the two souls standing hand in hand before the altar, because Mega, the girl once hidden in shadows, had walked into the light. She was no longer just beautiful. She was visible, chosen, cherished, and Nikon, with eyes only for her, kissed her gently as the world watched, sealing a love that had broken every lock and burned every false crown to ash. The air froze with tension as Nikon's voice echoed, "Come in, Mega," and all heads turned to the grand entrance where silence reigned just moments before, now trembling with anticipation. The vast hall, aglow with golden chandeliers and lined with prestigious guests draped in their finest, seemed to hold its breath. Then the towering oak doors slowly creaked open with a weight that felt symbolic, as if history itself was making room for something sacred. And there she was, Mega, a vision not of extravagance but of serene power. Her bridal gown shimmered under the soft lights, hugging her graceful figure with gentle elegance, not opulence, but regality born of pain, resilience, and quiet strength. The pure white of her gown clashed poetically with the smooth, rich brown of her skin, which glowed like polished bronze kissed by the early morning sun. Her hair, long, straight, and styled with dignity, flowed down her back like a curtain of midnight satin. Her eyes, wide and filled with both fear and fierce courage, swept across the stunned guests, and her full lips, painted with muted rose, held a trembling breath that echoed louder than any scream. She wasn't walking toward wealth or glory. She was walking into her worth. Nikon's face softened the moment he saw her, all pretense falling away as awe replaced every ounce of composure. For him, this wasn't just a wedding interruption. It was the world finally witnessing what he had known all along. She was the light they had all overlooked. Gasps sliced through the room. A hush fell again, and then a piercing, cracked voice shattered it. Virginia's. Her body lurched forward as though physically struck by the truth, unraveling before her eyes. Her lipstick smudged, her eyeliner streaked with panic. She screamed, "No! No! This isn't real! This can't be happening!" Her scream echoed like a tantrum of a queen being dethroned. She stumbled forward, grabbing the edge of the table, her hands trembling violently. You said you would marry Liana. What is this betrayal?" But her voice didn't matter anymore. It was weak, hollow, stripped of power. Nikon didn't even glance at her. His eyes were locked on Mega, whose steps carried the grace of a woman who had been broken, beaten emotionally, but never bowed. Each step she took down the aisle was a defiance against every cruel word, every locked door, every insult that had tried to bury her. The hush turned into murmurs, whispers of admiration, disbelief, awe. Cameras rose from every corner like silver butterflies capturing a moment too divine to miss. The most powerful man in the city was standing there with a calm smile, not for the elite guests or the media, but for the quiet girl who used to sleep near storage rooms and whisper her dreams to the ceiling. Mega reached him and he stepped forward, offering his hand, not as a savior but as a partner. She placed her hand in his slowly, tears blurring her vision. "You're shaking," he whispered softly, so only she could hear. "I've got you now. No more hiding, no more fear." She nodded once, too moved to speak, as her heart pounded like a storm trapped inside her chest. Nikon turned to the stunned crowd. This is the woman I love," he declared, his voice clear and commanding. "Not because she's rich or famous or loud, but because she's kind and strong, and she held on to hope even when everyone tried to crush it." He glanced toward Virginia, who now looked aged beyond her years, makeup cracked, fury turning to disbelief. "I know how you treated her. I saw it. I felt it in her voice every night we talked. You locked her away and tried to dress up cruelty in gold. But love doesn't bow to manipulation. It answers only to the heart." Virginia fell to her knees, her fingers digging into the edge of the chair as her voice broke again. "Please. Nikon, you don't understand. Everything I did." But he cut her off with a calm that silenced the room again. "Everything you did was rooted in control and greed. You saw Mega as a burden. I see her as a blessing." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a velvet ring box, and opened it before the world. Inside glistened a ring crafted not for spectacle but meaning. A delicate band of intertwined silver and gold, symbolizing 2 lives, 2 worlds, becoming one. He gently took Mega's left hand, lifting it with reverence as though holding something sacred. "With this ring," he whispered again, "I give you more than a promise. I give you my home, my name, my truth, and every sunrise of the life we will build together." The ring slid onto her trembling finger, and gasps turned to tears from some corners of the room. Liana, frozen in her wedding gown at the front, clutched her bouquet with lifeless fingers, the white roses suddenly mocking in their innocence. She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't. No words came. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, welled with tears not of heartbreak, but humiliation. Nikon leaned in, pressing a kiss to Mega's hand, then turned again to the crowd. This was never a mistake. This is destiny correcting itself. The officiant, recovering from the twist that turned the ceremony into legend, stepped forward with trembling hands and asked with a cautious voice, "Do you, Nikon Alvarez, take Mega Evans as your lawfully wedded wife?" Nikon's voice came like thunder wrapped in velvet. "I do. More than anything." The officiant turned to Mega. "And do you, Mega Evans, take Nikon Alvarez?" But she didn't let him finish. Her voice, quiet but unwavering, said, "I do. With all that I am." And with those words, the world bore witness to a wedding unlike any other, not born of arrangement or convenience, but born of redemption. "Then by the power vested in me," the officiant concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." Nikon didn't wait for permission. He leaned in, holding her face gently, and kissed her, slowly, deeply, and with the kind of passion that rewrites the meaning of love for everyone watching. Applause erupted, fierce and rising like waves crashing against a long-held dam. The world had seen the unthinkable, a girl from shadows being crowned in light. And she, for the first time in her life, believed it too. The kiss broke, but the spell did not. Mega turned her head slightly, spotting her younger self in a mirror, a scared, simple girl used to being silenced. That girl was gone. She was a bride now, a wife, a queen. Her crown wasn't on her head. It was in the love she had earned, the truth she had lived, and the man who now stood by her side. As the last flash of a camera faded, and the crowd's whispers dissolved into the hum of the evening breeze, Nikon gently held Mega's hand and guided her away from the astonished guests, away from the chaos that once defined her world, toward a place only they knew. A private ocean view suite he had secretly reserved and decorated himself with tender care, a sanctuary bathed in soft candlelight and the fragrance of white roses that lined the floor in delicate trails leading toward a grand arched window where moonlight poured through like a blessing from the heavens. The waves beyond whispered promises as they rolled ashore beneath a sky scattered with stars. And inside every detail whispered devotion, from the soft satin drapes to the crimson petals scattered across a snow-white bed, untouched, sacred, waiting not just for a couple but for two souls ready to intertwine in love and healing. As they stepped inside, Mega's breath caught, not from the opulence but from the care he had poured into every corner. And when she turned to look at him, her wide eyes shimmered with silent wonder, her heart pounding with the overwhelming realization that this wasn't a dream. This was her life now, a life she never imagined she was worthy of, and yet here he stood, tall, elegant in his white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his beard dusted in golden light, watching her with a gaze so full of love that it wrapped around her more securely than any embrace ever had. He stepped closer, took her trembling hands in his warm, steady palms, and said nothing for a long moment, just studied her face as if memorizing her features again, letting the silence speak the words that didn't need to be spoken, and finally whispered, "You are my miracle, Mega, and tonight I will cherish you, not because it's our wedding night, but because you are you." And at that, her lips parted in a soft, tearful smile, and she nodded, not trusting her voice, only her heart, which beat louder than ever before. He slowly raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, then to her wrist, and finally stepped back just enough to give her space to breathe, to look around, to feel her worth rise in the golden stillness of the room as she stepped deeper inside, her bridal gown catching the light in folds of shimmering white that seemed to glow against her smooth brown skin. And then, when she turned back to him, He was already reaching for her veil, lifting it gently, reverently, as if unveiling not just a bride but a new chapter. And when their eyes met again, it was like watching dawn meet dusk, two worlds greeting each other in eternal recognition. He cupped her cheeks and leaned in slowly, letting her feel every inch of anticipation in the air, until his lips finally met hers. Not in urgency, but in the kind of kiss that says, "I'm here." The kind of kiss that holds you before hands ever touch you. The kind of kiss that tells a girl who was once locked away that she is now found, treasured, protected. Mega's hands slid up to rest over his chest, her palms sensing the strength of the man who had shattered her prison with just presence and truth. And when he pulled her gently closer, holding her not with possession but with devotion, her body melted against him like sunlight on snow, every part of her unraveling, not in shame or fear, but in trust so deep it silenced every scar her past had etched into her soul. Slowly, he led her to the couch first, letting her rest, letting her speak, his arms around her as they sat side by side, sharing whispers about how far she had come, how strong she had always been, how proud he was to call her his wife, and her eyes welled with tears that he kissed away one by one, each drop a chapter of pain erased by tenderness. And then he asked, only with his eyes, if she was ready to let love reach deeper, not just in body but in spirit. And when she nodded, he stood, lifted her gently into his arms, and carried her toward the bed, her laughter soft, her fingers gripping his shoulders, her heart full not of nerves but of wonder, because in his arms she wasn't afraid anymore. She was home. He laid her down like she was sacred, kneeling beside her and brushing back the loose curls from her face, and then he slowly unfastened her gown, not in hunger but in honor, peeling away the layers of pain life had clothed her in for so long, until all that was left was her, bare, beautiful, unhidden, and more than worthy. And when his clothes joined hers in a pile of forgotten pain, their bodies met like poetry. Every kiss, every touch, every sigh an unspoken verse in a love story written not with ink but with soul. They moved together slowly, as if time had bowed to them, as if the universe had hushed so their hearts could speak freely. And when they finally joined, it wasn't just the joining of skin and warmth, but of trust and truth. A promise sealed not just in pleasure but in presence, and she gasped softly at the depth of it all, not just the feeling but the knowing that he saw her, wanted her, adored her, and would never let her fade again. Afterward they lay in silence, her head resting on his chest, his fingers drawing gentle circles along her arm, their legs tangled like vines of ivy, steady and growing. And in the soft hush between midnight and morning, he whispered stories of dreams they would build, children they might have, journeys they would take, and how every day he would wake up and choose her again. And she, with tears slipping quietly onto his chest, promised the same, her voice tender and breathy as she said, "Thank you for seeing me," to which he smiled and replied, "You were never invisible, Mega. The world just wasn't bright enough to see you. Until now." And in that moment the room glowed brighter than ever, not from candles or moonlight, but from the warmth of love truly earned, and as sleep gently took them in its arms, she smiled in her dreams for the first time in years, no longer whispering her pain to the stars, but whispering love to the man beside her, knowing that her night of light had only just begun. As the first morning light touched the ocean's surface, casting golden ripples across the world that had once felt so cruel to Mega, she awoke wrapped not only in Nikon's protective arms, but in a peace she had never dared to imagine. No longer the trembling girl hiding in darkness, no longer the silent shadow of a household that never saw her, but now the wife of a man whose very presence made her feel seen, chosen, and whole. Beside her, Nikon stirred softly, brushing a kiss to her forehead with the kind of familiarity that made her heart thrum gently. like a lullaby she could finally trust, and as they lay quietly in the glowing hush of their first morning, together as husband and wife, a sense of purpose began to rise within her, not one fueled by revenge or resentment, but by something far stronger: compassion, determination, and the quiet fire of someone who had suffered, survived, and now stood ready to lift others from the same storms she once endured. When she sat up, the city spread wide before her like a canvas, the breeze fluttering through sheer curtains like a messenger of new beginnings. And as Nikon opened his eyes and looked at her with that same unwavering adoration, she turned to him and said with gentle conviction, "I want to give girls like me a home, one where they're not just safe but seen." And without hesitation his hand reached for hers, his voice steady and full of pride as he said, "Then let's build that world together, my queen." And so began a journey not of castles and crowns, but of courage and compassion, where each day Mega stood taller, no longer defined by the dust and silence of her past, but by the lives she now touched with the power of her voice and heart. Nikon used his influence not to dominate, but to amplify her mission, making space in boardrooms and headlines for her vision. And soon the city knew not only of the tycoon's stunning bride, but of the fierce and graceful woman who had turned her pain into purpose. Together they created a foundation named The Stars She Spoke To. In honor of the nights Mega used to whisper her hopes into the skies, and this charity opened doors for orphaned and abandoned girls, doors to education, safety, healing, and love, where laughter now echoed in halls built on once broken ground, and where girls with wide eyes and hesitant steps began to dream boldly because someone who looked like them had made it all possible. As for Virginia and Liana, the world they clung to crumbled like dust, not by vengeance but by truth. When Nikon's silent investigations uncovered years of financial fraud and social deceit, every sponsor, every ally, every shallow admirer turned their backs, and the newspapers that once celebrated them now bore headlines of scandal and shame, forcing them to retreat into bitter obscurity, their names erased from elite circles and their legacy replaced by whispers of disgrace. The very house where Mega had once been locked away, where her voice had been ignored and her worth buried, was finally sold by Nikon, who handed Mega the deed and asked, "What do you want to do with it?" And without a pause, she said, "Tear it down. It was never a home." And so, with the echoing crash of bulldozers, that prison of memory was reduced to rubble, and in its place rose a sanctuary unlike any other, Mega's home for rescued hearts, a glowing, open-hearted residence where love poured in like sunlight through every window, where girls held hands and danced barefoot on soft lawns, where no one was ever locked away again. She visited often, not as a benefactor, but as a sister, a mentor, a living reminder that no beginning was too broken for a beautiful ending, and the girls would run to her, wrapping their small arms around her waist, telling her their dreams and calling her Queen Mega, not out of formality, but from the reverence they felt for her strength and story. Her days were now filled with meetings that changed lives, with speeches that stirred souls, and with quiet moments beside Nikon in the garden of their ocean estate, where they often watched the sun dip into the water and spoke of how love, true, selfless, unshakable love, had rewritten their destinies. Mega never sought recognition, but recognition found her nonetheless: awards, invitations, media praise. But she remained rooted in humility, always crediting her journey not to fate or luck, but to faith, resilience, and one man who saw her worth when no one else did. They traveled the world, too, not for luxury, but to study and fund better models of care for orphan children, turning their honeymoon into a lifelong mission, and every city they touched bore a trace of her kindness, her words leaving prints on hearts the way her father's stargazing stories once left marks on hers. And when they finally stood beneath the stars again on the anniversary of their wedding, Nikon wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing his chin to her shoulder and saying softly, "Look how far you've come, my love, from locked rooms to global stages, from whispered pain to spoken purpose." And she smiled, her eyes misty but strong, turning to face him and placing her hand on his heart, as she said, "And look how far we'll go, from palace to every corner of the world, because love like this doesn't stop. It multiplies." And as their lips met again under the heavens that once held her silent prayers, a breeze swept past, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the home she had built for others, reminding her that while her journey began in shadows, it had always been leading here, to a life not of revenge but redemption, not of sorrow but service, and above all, to a love that had not only rescued her from prison, but had crowned her with a life brighter than she'd ever dreamed, forever reigning beside the man who saw her worth first.